Hi, I'm J.R. Wheatley. I'm an amateur photographer and videographer, but professionally for the last couple of decades, primarily I've been an educator, and that's why I'm in this course. So for my first tutorial, being a photographer, I'm going to work on a photograph in Photoshop and show you how to turn a color photograph into a sepia tone photograph. Okay, let's get to work. I took this photo a few weeks ago in Mojave National Preserve, and I actually quite like it in color as it is now. However, to sort of give it an old-timey Western sort of feel, I was thinking about applying a sepia filter to it to see how that looks. Now in Photoshop, you can apply a sepia filter in a couple of clicks and leave it as is, and it will be a sepia tone photo. However, there are a few things you can do to exercise a bit more control over the photo so that it's more elegantly sepia toned, and that's what this tutorial will be about. So to begin with, I would like to apply a vignette around the edges of this photo. So I'm going to go to Filter and Lens Correction. Then I'm going to go over here to the Custom tab and go down to Vignette. Now if I go to the right, I'll get a light colored vignette around the edges, which I don't want. Actually, I want it to be darkened around the edges. So I'm going to take it down to about -75. I'd like it pretty dark around the edges. And the midpoint I'm going to mess with until I get something I like, maybe up somewhere around, 65 or so. So you can see I have this sort of darkened vignette that sort of draws the eye into the center and leaves less detail to be seen around the edges. I'm going to click OK to apply that vignette, and there we go. For the next step, you want to turn this into black and white. So I'm going to apply a new adjustment layer, and I'm going to choose black and white. Click OK. Okay, now it's in black and white, and we have this panel here on the right, which will allow us to sort of darken and lighten the individual colors that were there before we turned it to black and white. So for example, I can mess with the reds, and there's a lot of red in this photo because of the red in the horse and the red in the background. So if I darken the red, I darken a decent amount of the photo. Or I can lighten it up if I would like the horse to be extremely light. So I'm going to move that to about there. And you can mess with each one of the sliders to see what looks best to you in black and white. There's a lot of yellow in this photo, so moving the yellow slider affects it a decent amount. I think I'm going to leave that about here. The greens, there's not a whole lot of green in this photo, so as you see, as this slider goes up and down, it really does very little to the photo. I'm just going to leave it where it was. When you convert a photo to sepia tone or black and white, you can use these as you wish, slide them back and forth to see what provides the most pleasing image to you. Okay, so we have the black and white filter applied. Next, I'm going to go for another new adjustment layer, this time a curves layer. Click OK. And over here we have the curves panel. Now what I would like to do with this photo now is to sort of bring up the blacks. Because when you apply a sepia tone to a photo, it won't apply to the very black areas. Those areas will remain black. So what we want to do is bring our completely black areas of the photo up to more of a gray than a total black, because a filter can actually work or be applied to the gray tones where it will not actually apply to the black tones because there is no light there. So I bring up the black point over here on the left, then add another dot here and drag this down, and it sort of gives the photo a matte look. So none of it is actually black with no light or detail. We've brought it up to a little bit of a gray. And I'm going to do a few more adjustments to bring back those highlights and the whites to about there. And we'll call this good for now. Now we can always come back and readjust these curves if necessary before exporting the final product. Okay, with our curves layer now adjusted, I'm going to apply a photo filter. So again, go to New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to go to Photo Filter this time. Click OK to create the filter. And here is the color that is being applied at the moment, a warm color filter. What I'm going to do is go into the drop-down menu and choose Sepia. This is one of the options that Photoshop provides by default. So now we have a sepia filter on this photo, but it's at a relatively low density. You can barely see any of the sepia. So what we're going to do is crank this all the way up to about 100. And now we have a dense sepia filter overlaid on our black and white photo. Make sure that preserve luminosity has been checked. And what we want to do now is make a few more adjustments to this layer. So right click here and go to your blending options. Now what I would like to do is, see, we have these sliders for this layer and the underlying layer. So click Alt or Option on your computer to split this slider here, and then drag the right half to about the center for this layer. And over here, click Alt again to split up this slider and slide this white slider, the left side of it, down to about here. So this gives some gradient to how the sepia filter is applied. So rather than applying a lot to the blacks, it applies less here and more so the further you get up here. And it isn't really applying it now to the whites. It sort of goes on a gradient, applying it here in the middle tones a little bit more. And as you get whiter and whiter, the sepia tone becomes is applied to a lesser degree. So you can mess around with these to see where you would really like them. I think like this here for the darks, and right about there for the lights. So this is where I'm going to leave my my layers blended. Click OK, and now you have a sepia toned photo that is more under your control with these adjustment layers than if you had simply applied a flat sepia filter in just a couple of clicks. This gives you more control over your sepia tone photos, and I actually quite like the result. I think this is a decent old Western, old-timey looking photo. So let's look at it again. This is without the filter. We added a black and white layer, a curves layer to make it more of a matte photo, and then messed with the sepia photo filter to come up with the final result.